You track your spending. You know your rent, your phone bill, your subscriptions. Maybe you've tried the budgeting apps, the spreadsheet, the 50-30-20 rule. And still, at the end of most months, the gap between what you earn and what you actually keep is wrong. Not slightly off. Meaningfully, frustratingly wrong. You've had raises that changed nothing. Bonuses that evaporated. You know you're not careless with money, so what exactly is happening? Here's what nobody has shown you yet. There is a category running through almost every financial decision you make. Invisible, uncategorized, never labeled on any budget template. And it is quietly consuming somewhere between a fifth and a quarter of everything you take home. The invisible line item on every paycheck. Take a 28-year-old marketing manager. She earns $75,000 a year. She tracks her spending in a spreadsheet: rent, groceries, utilities, subscriptions, the gym. She's not careless. She earns enough that she should be building savings. But she ends every year with almost nothing put away, and she genuinely cannot explain why. Here's what happens when you look more carefully. The phone she upgraded last year won $200 on a payment plan, so it felt like nothing. The neighborhood she rents in costs $300 more per month than a comparable apartment 2 miles out. But this area feels right for someone at her level. The restaurants she goes to aren't extravagant, but they're the ones her colleagues mention by name. The clothes aren't luxury brands, but she stopped buying anything that looks cheap. The gym is $90 a month at the nice location, not $25 at the functional one. None of these line items is obviously wasteful. None of them would embarrass her if someone asked. But together, they form a pattern. A pattern driven not primarily by need, or even by genuine preference, but by something else. Something about where she stands, relative to the people around her. Something about how she appears. But she's never labeled, and what most people never label, is status spending. It's not a single category. It's scattered across dozens of decisions. The car that's newer than it needs to be, the apartment in the right zip code, the vacation you mention afterward, the gift given at the price level your social group expects. These aren't random choices. They're signals, and they are collectively costing her, and probably you, more than any single budget line item you've ever worried about. The reason budgets fail so often isn't lack of discipline. It's that they track outputs without addressing the input driving them. You can't fix a leak you can't name. So let's name it. And more importantly, let's understand where it comes from. Because the spending pattern has a biological origin that goes back a very long time, to a world with very different stakes. The wiring that makes it inevitable, the impulse to signal status, is not a personality flaw. It is not vanity, shallowness, or weak character. It is one of the oldest, most deeply embedded features of the human brain. And understanding this is the first step toward working with it, rather than being driven by it without knowing it. Robert Sapolsky, a neuroendocrinologist at Stanford, spent decades studying how social hierarchies work in primates and in humans. His research makes one thing unmistakable. The brain treats social position as a survival variable. In ancestral environments, where humans lived in small bands of roughly 50 to 150 people, your rank in that group was not a vanity metric. It determined your access to food, to shelter, to protection in times of danger. Low-status individuals in those environments faced genuinely worse survival outcomes. The brain's reward circuitry responded accordingly. Status gains trigger dopamine responses. Status losses trigger cortisol, the same stress hormone that floods your system when you sense physical threat. Sapolsky's research shows that perceived status affects immune function, cardiovascular health, and cognitive performance. The brain cannot reliably distinguish between "I am lower status in my group" and "I am in danger." It responds to both with the same urgency. This is the engine under the hood of everything that follows. When you feel a pull toward the nicer car, the better neighborhood, the restaurant your peers would recognize. You are not being frivolous. You are responding to a survival mechanism that evolution spent hundreds of thousands of years sharpening. The problem is that the mechanism was calibrated for a world that no longer exists. You are not in a 150-person band where rank determines whether you eat. You are in a modern economy where status anxiety has been studied, systematized, and turned into a multi-trillion-dollar industry that profits from keeping you slightly behind in spending. The wiring is neutral. The exploitation of it is not. Once you understand this, a lot of previously confusing behavior starts to make sense. People who cannot explain their own spending patterns aren't irrational. They're responding to deep biological signals in an environment those signals were never designed for. And this exploitation didn't start with social media. Someone noticed it more than a century ago and wrote it down. Veblen saw this coming in 1899. In 1899, an American economist named Thorstein Veblen published The Theory of the Leisure Class. His central observation was simple and devastating. The wealthy don't primarily buy things because they need them or because they genuinely enjoy them. They buy things to demonstrate that they can. The expensive carriage, the ornate home, the elaborate dinner party. These are signals sent to an audience about the signaler's position in the social order. Veblen called this conspicuous consumption. The word conspicuous is key. The spending must be visible, recognizable, legible to the relevant audience. A large anonymous donation does less for status than a small branded purchase worn every day. The status value of a transaction depends directly on how readable it is to the people watching. What Veblen couldn't have fully predicted is what happened next: the industrialization of production, the rise of mass marketing, and the gradual democratization of the status signal. In 1899, conspicuous consumption was a game played by a small, wealthy class. By the 20th century, as goods became more affordable and credit more available, the same mechanism became available at every income level. Your $200 smartphone is playing the same game as the gilded carriage, the branded gym membership, the apartment in the right neighborhood, the restaurant you'd mentioned to a colleague. These are all conspicuous consumption, scaled to your income and your audience. The mechanism is identical, only the price points changed. Veblen wasn't moralizing. He was describing a structural feature of status economies. The game is real. It's everywhere, and opting out requires understanding exactly what you're opting out of. Most people can't opt out because they don't know they're in. And what Veblen described in 1899 captures only part of the picture. He was writing in a world where your reference group, the audience you were signaling to, was local. What happens to the game when that boundary disappears entirely? Your reference group sets your spending floor. In 1954, social psychologist Leon Festinger proposed social comparison theory, a simple but powerful idea that humans evaluate their own circumstances not by any absolute standard, but by comparing themselves to others. And crucially, not to all others, specifically to people who are similar to them but slightly better off. You don't benchmark your income against a subsistence farmer or a hedge fund manager. You compare yourself to your colleagues, your friends from university, the people at the dinner parties you go to. That reference group sets your implicit baseline, the floor below which you feel you've fallen behind. Here's where this becomes expensive. The reference group is not static. Every promotion, every move to a nicer apartment, every step up in your social circle moves your comparison group upward. You don't feel like you've arrived. You feel like the baseline shifted. The lifestyle that felt aspirational 2 years ago now feels normal, and anything below it feels like regression. Economists call this lifestyle inflation. A salary increase that should improve your savings rate instead gets absorbed by a spending reset. A better neighborhood, more expensive restaurants, a wardrobe that matches the new job title. The raise was real. The improvement in financial position wasn't. Richard Easterlin's documented something called the Easterlin Paradox. Within a country, richer people report higher life satisfaction than poorer people. But when entire countries grow richer over time, average life satisfaction barely moves. The reason? Everyone's income rises together. The reference group stays roughly the same, and the relative position that actually drives satisfaction doesn't shift. You can earn significantly more than you did 5 years ago and feel no more financially secure. Because your reference group moved up, your spending floor moved with it, and the gap feels identical. This is not a failure of gratitude or willpower. It's a structural feature of how comparison-based status works. And in the modern world, the reference group has been supercharged in a way no 1950s economist could have anticipated. The algorithm makes it worse. For most of human history, your comparison group was bounded by geography. You measured yourself against the people in your neighborhood, your workplace, your social circle. That physical boundary contained the anxiety. The gap between your life and the most aspirational life your reference group could demonstrate was limited by proximity. Social media dissolved that boundary, and the algorithm made the problem worse in a specific and measurable way. Platforms optimize for engagement. The more time spent on the feed, the more advertising revenue generated. Aspirational content and visible wealth perform well algorithmically. Because they trigger the social comparison mechanism, they generate a low-grade anxiety that keeps you scrolling. The algorithm has no incentive to show you an accurate cross-section of life. It shows you what keeps you watching longest. Research by Ethan Cross and colleagues, published in PLOS One in 2013, found that passive social media use, scrolling and watching, without posting or commenting, predicted declines in subjective well-being over time. Not active use, just watching. The researchers found the effect was consistent with involuntary upward social comparison. The brain processes a stream of aspirational content as social signal, not as curated performance, and updates your sense of relative standing accordingly. A 27-year-old in any city now has, as their effective reference group, not just their actual social circle, but also influencers, aspirational lifestyle accounts, and the carefully curated highlight reels of hundreds of people they barely know. The brain doesn't reliably distinguish between this is a local social competitor and this is a global media feed. It responds to the status signal either way. The result, a reference group that has been artificially inflated toward the top of the consumption spectrum, processed through a brain, calibrated to treat social position as survival critical. While you scroll on a Tuesday morning, every session can reset your spending floor upward without you choosing it or noticing it. And the algorithm has a collaborator at the level of individual purchases themselves, a mechanism that turns one upgrade into 10. The Diderot Effect, how one purchase triggers 10 more. In 1769, the French philosopher Denis Diderot received a beautiful scarlet dressing gown as a gift. He loved it. He put it on in his study, and almost immediately, something shifted. Everything else in the room, the old desk, the worn chair, the faded curtains, suddenly looked shabby by comparison. The gown was too fine for its surroundings. And so, piece by piece, Diderot began replacing his study. The desk was upgraded, then the chair, then the bookshelves. By the time he finished, he'd spent money he didn't have, and he wrote a rueful essay about it. Regrets on parting with my old dressing gown. Centuries later, the anthropologist Grant McCracken named this pattern the Diderot Effect, the cascade of additional purchases that one status upgrade triggers by making everything around it feel inadequate. A single upgrade creates a coherence problem. The new thing doesn't fit the old context, and the solution the brain generates is to upgrade the context too. You've almost certainly experienced this. A new phone makes the old case look wrong, which means a new case, which means the bag holding it feels dated. A kitchen renovation makes the living room feel unfinished. A promotion makes the wardrobe feel like it belongs to a previous version of yourself. What makes the Diderot effect powerful and expensive is that each step feels rational. You're not being impulsive. You're solving a coherence problem. The new thing doesn't fit, therefore adjust. But the adjustments compound into an upgrading spiral that was entirely predictable from the moment of the first purchase. Industries understand this. Apple's product ecosystem is partly a Diderot effect machine, designed so that each device creates gravitational pull toward the others. Luxury brands place entry-level products within reach of aspirational buyers precisely because the entry product creates coherence pressure toward higher-end purchases. Retailers design lifestyle-coordinated product lines for the same reason. The important thing to carry forward, any single significant status upgrade, is not just a single purchase. It's a down payment on a cascade. The question worth asking before the first purchase is, what will this make feel inadequate? And then there's the deeper question. What are you actually buying when you buy the feeling that goes with it? What you're actually buying and why it never satisfies. When you make a status purchase, you're buying two things simultaneously. The first is an external signal. This purchase communicates something to your social group about your position, your taste, your level of success. The second is an internal signal. This purchase tells you something about yourself that you want to believe. Both of these are real. The social signaling is functional. Your reference group does update their perception of you based on visible goods and lifestyle choices. The self-signaling is real too. Wearing a certain brand or driving a certain car genuinely produces a feeling of identity confirmation. Neither motivation is trivial or irrational, but both are subject to something psychologists call hedonic adaptation, the documented tendency for people to return relatively quickly to a baseline level of satisfaction after positive changes. The status purchase delivers the feeling it promised for a while, and then, reliably, it doesn't. In a foundational paper on what they called the hedonic treadmill, Philip Brickman and Donald Campbell documented that after significant positive life events, people tend to adapt back toward their baseline happiness level within months. Studies on lottery winners found their subjective well-being returned toward baseline well within a year of winning. The same mechanism operates in smaller form on every major status purchase. The car loses its thrill. The apartment becomes just where you live. The watch stops producing the feeling it produced in the first weeks. The treadmill metaphor is precise. You're running, expending real money and real energy, and staying in the same emotional place. The satisfaction requires the next purchase to restart. Here's what makes this particularly expensive. The financial obligation outlasts the emotional payoff by a significant margin. The car payment runs for 5 years. The apartment lease renews. The credit card carries the balance forward. You stopped feeling what you bought the purchase for, but you're still paying for it, often long after the feeling has been forgotten. And there are entire industries that built their business models around exactly this cycle. The industries built on your status anxiety. Status anxiety is not an accidental side effect of consumer culture. It's a structural input into several of the world's largest industries, deliberately maintained because it is the mechanism that drives repeat purchasing. Fashion operates on engineered obsolescence. Seasonal trend cycles don't emerge organically. They are designed to declare last season's wardrobe unfashionable on a reliable schedule. The product hasn't worn out. The clothes still fit, but the social signal has expired. Buying new clothes isn't just consumption. It's maintenance of social legibility in a system where the legibility rules are changed by the industry on a fixed calendar. The automotive industry perfected the 3-year lease, a financial product designed to make it convenient, nearly cost-neutral in monthly terms, to be seen in a newer model every 36 months. The functional utility of a car doesn't improve meaningfully on a 3-year cycle. The status signal does. Consumer technology upgrade cycles are often more about aesthetics and market positioning than genuine capability improvements. The camera on your 2-year-old phone works. The upgrade is largely about belonging to the current cohort, not falling visibly behind the wave. Juliet Shore's research in The Overspent American documented how the status game accelerated in the late 20th century. The reference group that people benchmarked their spending against shifted from their actual neighbors, locally comparable, middle income, to television characters and media figures living at significantly higher income levels. Spending followed the reference group upward. Incomes for most households did not follow at the same pace. What this means is that the escalation in status spending is not a spontaneous cultural shift. It's a predictable output of an industry that spent decades scientifically optimizing the status anxiety mechanism. Knowing this doesn't make you immune, but it does change the frame. You are not making neutral consumer choices in a neutral marketplace. You're operating inside a system engineered by very well-funded people whose business model requires that you stay slightly behind and always approaching the next upgrade. But the most immediate pressure doesn't come from an industry. It comes from the people sitting across the table from you. The social permission system. Peer groups set spending floors just as effectively as aspirational media, and they do it through a mechanism that's harder to resist because it's embedded in actual relationships. Here's how it works. If your social circle attends a certain tier of restaurant, contributes at a certain level to group gifts, takes a certain caliber of vacation, and talks about money in ways that assume a certain lifestyle, then opting out of any of these isn't financially neutral. It creates friction. The reputation for being cheap, difficult about money, or not fully present. Most groups enforce these norms without awareness or intent. The effect is real regardless. Your peer group sets an implicit annual membership fee, and paying it is the price of belonging. Think about this concretely. Over the last 12 months, how many dinners, trips, events, or occasions did you attend primarily because the social cost of not being there felt too high? Not because you genuinely wanted to go? Estimate what that cost. For many professionals in their 20s and 30s in any city, the number is meaningful, often several $1,000s annually. It lives inside social life on any budget. It has never been labeled as status spending. The most important financial decision most people never consciously examine is, which peer group are you embedded in, and what is the annual membership fee? This is not an argument for isolating yourself or abandoning friendships. It's an argument for seeing the cost clearly, because a decision made unconsciously is still a decision with real financial consequences. There's a harder question embedded here too. Some of the peer group pressure is about not standing out, and not standing out has historically felt like a survival priority, because in small social groups, exclusion carried real costs. Opting out of group spending norms is read, at some level, as a status challenge. The brain flags this as social danger. That's why intellectual knowledge about overspending rarely translates directly into the ability to stop. The anxiety driving it is not rational in origin, and rationality alone doesn't dissolve it. What you need first is a diagnostic. You need to see the actual number, the status audit, making the invisible visible. Here is the practical exercise at the center of this episode. Do this once, and your relationship with your own spending will not go back to what it was. Pull 3 months of your actual bank and credit card statements, not estimates, real transactions. Go through every expense above a threshold that feels meaningful to you. Maybe $30, maybe $50. Your call. For each expense, classify it into one of 3 categories. Functional. This solves a real problem at roughly the best available price. Rent is functional. Groceries are functional. A phone you genuinely need for work is functional. The $90 gym versus the $25 gym is worth questioning, but keep classifying. Experiential. This created a genuine memory or pleasure you would choose again with full information, and no social pressure involved. The trip you still think about warmly. Experiential. The concert that was actually great. Experiential. The dinner with people you love, where you genuinely didn't want to be anywhere else. Experiential. Status. This expense primarily existed to signal something to your social group, or to maintain a self-image you wanted to project. The restaurant you'd mentioned to colleagues. Worth asking. The neighborhood premium on your apartment. Likely status, at least in part. The upgrade you made because the working version felt embarrassing to use in public. Status. Here's what makes this exercise uncomfortable and valuable in equal measure. The categories aren't always clean. A lot of spending is genuinely mixed, enjoyable and status-motivated at the same time. That's fine. The goal is not perfect classification. The goal is making the category visible for the first time. Most people who do this exercise find the status column significantly larger than they expected. Not because they've been irrational, but because they've never looked at it as a category before. Then take one more step. Annualize your status spend. Multiply those 3 months by 4. Ask what that amount would grow to over 10 years if invested at a conservative return instead. At roughly 7% annually, money doubles approximately every decade. That is the actual cost of the game as played by default. And here's the important thing. You don't have to stop playing. You just have to decide consciously how you play it. How to exit without exiting your life. The instinct, after doing the audit, is often to go cold. Cut everything. Downgrade the apartment. Get the cheap phone. Stop eating out. That strategy fails, and it fails predictably. It's fighting evolutionary wiring directly, trying to use willpower to override a survival mechanism. And willpower is a depletable resource that runs down faster than spending habits do. Austerity doesn't stick because it requires constant self-opposition. The goal is not to quit the status game. It's to stop playing the unconscious version of it and start playing a version you've chosen deliberately. 3 tools for doing this. First, build status through non-monetary channels. Expertise, reliability, generosity, calm under pressure. These are genuine status signals that peer groups respond to, and they require no purchases. Research by Beleza, Gino, and Keenan found something counterintuitive. Deliberate non-conformity in certain contexts. The professor in running shoes at a formal conference, the executive in a plain watch among luxury goods, can actually signal higher status to informed observers because the implicit message is security. You're clearly not performing. Real status isn't about what you own. It's about what you're known for. Second, design friction into the purchase process. For any non-essential expense above a threshold you set yourself, institute a 48-hour wait. Not a permanent no, just 48 hours. Status-driven purchase impulses are nearly always time-sensitive. They depend on the anxiety of the moment, the sense that not buying now means falling behind. Research on impulse spending consistently finds that a cooling-off period dramatically reduces completion rates on status-motivated purchases because the emotional urgency fades. Genuine need doesn't fade in 48 hours. Status anxiety usually does. Third, shift the comparison target. Instead of measuring yourself against your peer group's visible consumption, a game you cannot win, because the display is curated and the wealth behind it is often borrowed. Compare yourself to your own financial trajectory over time. Net worth growth, savings rate, months of runway. These produce real evidence of actual forward movement, not the performance of it. None of this requires lecturing friends about money or declining every invitation. It requires something quieter, a clear-eyed decision about which game you're measuring yourself against, made consciously rather than defaulting into the one that's been running since your first paycheck. The status symbol nobody can see and nobody can take away. Think about the most financially free person you're likely to know at age 50. Not the highest earner, the person with the most actual options, the one who can leave a bad job without panic, take 6 months off without it being a crisis, move cities because they want to, not because they have to, weather a recession from a position of stability, make decisions based on what they actually want rather than what they can currently afford. That person is almost certainly not the one who drove the most impressive car at 30. The asset that status spending cannot buy is options, financial runway, the ability to choose. It is completely invisible from the outside. No one can see your savings rate, your net worth trajectory, your months of reserves, and it cannot be taken from you by a trend cycle, an algorithm update, or a peer group that moved upward. Here is what the math actually looks like. 2 people, same income, same city, same starting point. One unconsciously allocates roughly 20% of take-home pay to status spending across scattered categories: the neighborhood premium, the wardrobe floor, the car signal, the social membership fee. The other does the audit, sees the number clearly, and reduces that category to roughly 5%, putting the difference to work consistently. At age 45, the gap in net worth between these 2 people is not a rounding error. It's a different category of financial life. That's not a story about frugality. It's a story about choosing a different scoreboard, one that measures something you actually get to keep. So here's what this episode has walked through. The impulse to signal status is biological, wiring you didn't choose, calibrated for a world that no longer exists, running inside an economy designed to exploit it. Veblen named the mechanism in 1899. Conspicuous consumption as social signal, operating at every price point. Festinger mapped the reference group dynamic in the 1950s. We benchmark against people slightly above us, and every step up resets the baseline without us noticing. Sapolsky traced it back further. The brain treats social position as a survival variable, which is why rational budgeting alone never dissolves the anxiety that drives the spending. What's new is the algorithmic amplification, the global reference group served to you by platforms optimizing for engagement, not for your financial health. What's new is the Diderot cascade, where one upgrade creates coherence pressure toward 10 more. What's new is the hedonic treadmill accelerating through manufactured trend cycles and monthly upgrade schedules designed to keep you dissatisfied on a calendar. You can't uninstall the wiring, but you can see it. You can name it. You can run the audit on your own numbers. You can build status through channels that don't require a payment plan. You can wait 48 hours and watch the urgency dissolve. You can compare yourself to your own progress rather than your neighbor's performance. That's not a small thing. Most people never do it. The ones who do play a different game, with a scoreboard that actually moves. The status symbol nobody can see is the one nobody can take away, and it compounds quietly, year over year, while everyone else is paying the status tax. If this opens something up for you, stay around. There's more ahead.